There's a kind of cold that doesn't come from winter. It comes from watching a storm devour the horizon while you stand alone in a tower of glass and iron, responsible for a light that must never, ever go out. The lighthouse keepers of the 1880s knew this cold intimately. They understood something we've completely forgotten in our age of GPS and automated beacons. They knew how to survive months of absolute isolation on storm-battered rocks where a single mistake, one moment of inattention, one failed system meant ships would die on the rocks below and their screams would be the only company you'd have for weeks. They mastered techniques for maintaining complex oil-burning lenses that weighed 2 tons and required perfect precision every 4 hours, day and night, storm or calm, sick or healthy, sane or otherwise. They developed psychological protocols for enduring solitude so complete that some keepers would go 4, 5, 6 months without seeing another human face or hearing another human voice. And when everything went wrong, when supply ships couldn't reach them, when storms lasted for weeks, when the lens mechanisms failed or the tower itself began to crack under the assault of 100-foot waves, they had emergency procedures that kept both the light burning and their minds intact. In our modern world of automated navigation and satellite weather tracking, we've lost touch with what it actually took to keep a lighthouse operational when failure meant widows and orphans in every coastal town. How did these solitary keepers do it? What engineering marvels did they maintain with nothing but whale oil, brass polish, and their own 2 hands? And why do we know so little about the psychological toll of being the single point of failure between ships and death? Before we begin, if you're someone who listens to these regularly to fall asleep, it really helps if you hit like or subscribe. I'm always curious who's out there listening in the dark. So if you want, comment where you're listening from and what time it is. No pressure, just wondering. Alright, tonight we're going to Point Reyes Lighthouse, Northern California, 1883. But first, get comfortable. I really mean it this time. Adjust those pillows, pull that blanket up, maybe turn on your side toward the wall away from any light, because where we're going, you're going to want to feel safe and warm. The story of how lighthouse keepers survived isn't just about technical skill. It's about the slow, methodical routines that kept them alive when everything, the weather, the isolation, the equipment, even their own minds, conspired against them. So settle in. Let the weight of your blankets remind you that you're not standing in a glass tower surrounded by a storm that wants to kill you. You're safe. You're warm. And you're about to learn how they did it. The first thing you notice when you wake in a lighthouse is the silence, not the oppressive kind. The kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the blood moving through your veins. You've been the sole keeper of Point Reyes Light for 89 days now. 89 days since the supply boat dropped you off with 6 months' worth of lamp oil, dried goods, and a handshake from Captain Morrison, who said, "God keep you like you meant it." 9 days of waking to this silence, this absolute absence of human sound, that makes you wonder sometimes if the rest of the world still exists, or if it was all a dream, and there's only you, this tower, and the sea that wants to break both of you into pieces. Your pocket watch, a reliable Waltham that your father gave you before he died, reads 4:30 in the morning. You don't need it, really. Your body has learned the rhythm of the light. Every 4 hours, the clockwork mechanism that rotates the massive Fresnel lens needs winding. Every 4 hours, the lamp reservoir needs checking. Every 4 hours, you climb the 73 spiral stairs from your sleeping quarters to the lantern room and perform the ritual that keeps ships from dying on the rocks. You've done this rotation 267 times since you arrived. You'll do 800 more before the supply boat returns, if it returns. You slide from the narrow bed, your feet finding the cold floor automatically in the darkness. The keeper's quarters are sparse. A bed, a small table, a chair, a wood stove that you'll light later when the morning tasks are done. One window that faces east, toward land, though land is just a concept from here, a dark mass against a slightly lighter sky that might as well be the edge of the world. You dress in the dark, the same clothes you've worn for weeks because there's no one to see you, no one to care if your shirt is stained with lamp oil and your trousers are stiff with salt. The routine is what matters. The routine is what keeps you sane. Wool socks first, 2 pairs because the tower is always cold, the stone construction drinking heat from the air and offering nothing back. Then your keeper's trousers, heavy canvas that can withstand the caustic cleaning solutions and hot lamp oil. A flannel shirt, a wool vest over that, and finally your keeper's jacket, dark blue with brass buttons that you haven't polished in a month. The brass buttons in the lantern room, those you polish every single day, but these, the ones no one sees, they can tarnish. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters except the light. You light a candle, one of 200 you have left, and begin the climb. 73 steps. You counted them on your first day and you've never miscounted since. The spiral is tight, the iron stairs ringing with each footfall, the sound echoing in the stone shaft like a bell tolling for a funeral. The walls weep with condensation, moisture that seeps through the mortar and creates patterns that look like maps of countries that don't exist. You've named some of them during the long nights. New Solitude, the Republic of Silence, the Kingdom of One. The climb takes 3 minutes at your standard pace. You used to rush it in the first weeks. Some part of you always anxious that the lamp had gone out, that ships were dying while you slept. But you learned the lamp doesn't go out if you've set it correctly. The mechanisms don't fail if you maintain them properly. Rushing creates mistakes, and mistakes in a lighthouse don't just cost you embarrassment or lost time. They cost lives you'll never know about, families you'll never meet, futures that simply stop existing because you were careless. The lantern room hits you like it does every morning. Not with grandeur, though it is grand, with responsibility. The Fresnel lens dominates the space, a massive construct of hand-cut crystal prisms arranged in concentric rings, each one precisely angled to capture the light from the central lamp and throw it 16 miles out to sea. 4,000 pounds of glass and brass rotating on a bearing so perfectly engineered that you can spin the entire assembly with one finger. The French invented this lens system, and it's one of the most beautiful things humans have ever made. Each prism, each brass fitting, each carefully calibrated curve represents someone's life work. The craftsmen who cut this glass died long before you were born, but their work keeps sailors alive tonight. That's what you tell yourself. That's what keeps you climbing these stairs. The lamp is still burning, the flame steady and bright in its reservoir of whale oil. You check it first, always, before anything else. The flame height should be exactly 2 inches. No more, no less. Too high and you get smoke that coats the lens and reduces the light throw. Too low and the intensity drops enough that a ship in fog might miss it. You have a small brass measuring gauge that you hold next to the flame. 2 inches. Perfect. You've been doing this long enough that you can eyeball it now, but you measure anyway because eyeballing is how mistakes happen. The clockwork mechanism is next. It's an ingenious system, really. A massive weight, about 300 pounds of iron, hangs in the center shaft of the tower, suspended on a cable. As it descends, powered by gravity, it turns a series of gears that rotate the lens assembly, one full rotation every 60 seconds, creating that characteristic lighthouse sweep. Every 4 hours, the weight reaches the bottom and the rotation stops. That's when you wind it back up, cranking a handle that lifts the weight through a series of reduction gears. It takes about 20 minutes of steady cranking, and your right shoulder is significantly more muscular than your left after 89 days of this. You check the weight position. It's about 3/4 down, which means you have another hour before it needs winding. Good. That gives you time for the morning inspection, the critical walk around that every keeper performs at dawn. You take the cleaning cloth first, a soft cotton rag that you keep in a special box to prevent any grit or dirt from getting on it. The lens must be spotless. Even a fingerprint can create a distortion that reduces the light throw. You begin at the top ring of prisms, working your way around the lens in a spiral pattern, breathing on each section to create a light fog of moisture, then wiping with careful circular motions. This takes 30 minutes. You've timed it. Some keepers rush this part, but you don't. The lens is everything. The lens is the entire reason this tower exists, the reason you're here, the reason you endure the isolation and the storms, and the slow erosion of your certainty that you're still fully human. As you clean, you notice something. A sound, very faint, almost at the edge of hearing, a grinding noise coming from the rotation mechanism. Metal on metal, a slight catch in the smooth revolution of the gears. You stop cleaning and listen. There it is again. A tiny hesitation in the rotation. A fraction of a second pause that shouldn't exist. Your stomach tightens. You've read the manuals, the thick leather-bound books that live in the keeper's office below. You've studied the reports from other lighthouses. You know what this sound means. The bearing is failing. The precision-engineered brass bearing that allows 4,000 pounds of glass to spin smoothly is wearing out, probably from the constant salt air that corrodes everything in a lighthouse, no matter how carefully you maintain it. If it fails completely, the lens stops rotating. If the lens stops rotating, the light becomes a stationary point instead of a sweeping beam. Ships navigating by your light expect to see a sweep. They time their positions by counting the seconds between when your beam hits them. A stationary light, they might think it's a ship's lantern, a house on shore, anything except the lighthouse that marks the deadly rocks of Point Reyes. You crouch next to the mechanism, putting your ear close to the gears. The grinding happens once per rotation, which means it's probably one specific gear tooth that's worn or damaged. The bearing itself is accessible, but replacing it requires stopping the rotation, which means extinguishing the lamp. You can't extinguish the lamp during darkness. The regulations are absolute on this point. The light burns from sunset to sunrise. No exceptions, no excuses. If ships die because you stop the light to perform repairs, you'll be dismissed, prosecuted, possibly imprisoned. But if the bearing fails catastrophically during the night, the lamp stops rotating anyway, and you'll have the same result. You're facing a decision that every lighthouse keeper dreads. Do you perform preventive maintenance that requires breaking protocol? Or do you wait and hope the failing system holds until you can make repairs during daylight? The manual says you should report mechanical issues to the district inspector, but the district inspector is on a boat that won't arrive for another 90 more days. You've been on your own since the day you arrived, and you'll be on your own until either the supply boat returns or this tower becomes your tomb. You finish cleaning the lens, your mind working through the problem. The bearing has grease reservoirs that you can top up without stopping the rotation. That might buy you time. The grease is a special mixture. Whale oil blended with graphite powder stored in small ceramic jars that you keep in the maintenance locker. You retrieve one, along with a small brass pump designed specifically for injecting grease into the bearing housing while the mechanism is operating. This is delicate work. The rotating gears can catch clothing, hair, and fingers. You've read the accident reports. Keeper Samuel Briggs, Cape Cod Light, 1871, caught his sleeve in the rotation mechanism. They found him 3 hours later when the next shift keeper arrived. His arm wound so tightly into the gears that they had to dismantle half the clockwork to free his body. You tie your hair back. Though it's not long, you remove your jacket and roll. You kneel beside the mechanism, positioning the grease pump's nozzle against the bearing access port. The rotation brings the port around once per minute. You have about a 2-second window to insert the nozzle, pump grease, and withdraw before the moving gears return. Too slow, and you lose fingers. You breathe slowly, watching the rotation, counting the seconds. On the third rotation, you move. Nozzle in, 2 pumps of grease, nozzle out, clean. You repeat this 4 times. covering all 4 grease ports around the bearing assembly. By the 4th injection, you can hear the difference. The grinding hasn't stopped, but it's quieter, less pronounced. You've bought time, maybe a day, maybe a week. There's no way to know without disassembling the entire mechanism, and you can't do that alone. The sky outside the lantern room is beginning to lighten. Not sunrise yet, but the deep black of night fading to charcoal gray. You can see the ocean now, or at least the suggestion of it, a vast moving darkness that extends to the horizon. The wind is picking up. You can feel it through the tower, a low vibration that runs through the stone and iron. The barometer in the keeper's office has been falling for 2 days. There's a storm coming. Not a minor squall, but a major system. The kind that builds off the coast of Alaska and gathers strength over 1,000 miles of open ocean before slamming into the California coast with winds that can strip paint from wood and tear iron from stone. You've been through 3 storms since you arrived. The first one terrified. The second one you endured with grim determination. The third one you almost enjoyed, in a perverse way, the way you might enjoy a fever dream that you know will end eventually. But this one feels different. The air has a quality to it, a heaviness, a sense of something massive approaching. The seabirds know it too. The gulls that usually circle the tower look at... They've gone inland, to sheltered coves and protected valleys. Anywhere but here. You extinguish the lamp as the first real light of dawn breaks over the eastern hills. The flame dies with a soft whisper, and suddenly the lantern room is just a room, the magic gone, the lens reduced to its component parts of glass and metal. You check the oil reservoir, about 3/4 full. You'll need to refill it this afternoon from the main storage tanks in the base of the tower. You make a note in the logbook that every keeper maintains. November 14th, 1883. Dawn watch. Lamp performed adequately. Bearing shows signs of wear. Addressed with additional lubrication. Barometer 29.7 and falling. A storm is likely within 24 hours. The logbook is more than just records. It's proof of your diligence, your attention to detail, your worthiness to hold this position. It's also the only thing you write anymore, the only place your thoughts become words on paper. You used to keep a personal journal, writing long entries about your observations, your feelings, your slowly evolving understanding of solitude. But you stopped after the first month. There was no one to write to, no future version of yourself who would care about what you felt today. The only writing that matters is the official log, the record that will be inspected when the supply boat arrives. The document that determines whether you're competent or negligent, worthy or worthless. You begin the descent, 73 steps down, your hand trailing along the curved wall. The tower is waking up around you, the stone creaking as the sun's warmth, faint as it is in November, begins to work against the night's cold. You need food. You need to check the water supply. You need to inspect the exterior of the tower for storm damage before the new storm arrives. You need to secure anything that might become a projectile in high winds. You need to fill the lamp reservoirs, clean the spare lens covers, test the fog signal mechanism, wind all 17 clocks that keep precise time for lighthouse record keeping. You need to do 100 small tasks that add up to survival. But first, there's something else. Something you do every morning that isn't in the manual, isn't in the regulations, isn't anything you'd ever write in the official log. You go to the keeper's office, a small room at the base of the tower filled with shelves of manuals, reports, spare parts, and cleaning supplies. On one shelf, there's a photograph in a simple wooden frame. Your daughter, Catherine, who would be 7 now. The photograph was taken 3 years ago, before Catherine got sick, before the fever that took her in 4 days, before Eleanor looked at you with eyes that said she blamed you for not being there, for being at the lighthouse where you were stationed then, unable to get home in time to say goodbye to your daughter before she left and never came back. leaving only a letter that said she couldn't be married to a man who loved lights more than his family. You don't pick up the photograph anymore. You used to in the first weeks. You'd hold it and talk to it and pretend that explaining yourself to a piece of paper with an image on it would somehow reach back through time and make Eleanor understand that you weren't choosing the light over them. You were choosing the only work you knew how to do, the only way you could provide for them. But you stopped that too. The photograph just sits there now, a reminder that you're here because you have nowhere else to be, because the lighthouse service accepts men like you, men who are running from something. Men who need isolation because the alternative is facing a world that doesn't want them anymore. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. If you're finding this helpful for sleep, if my voice is working for you, hit that like button. And if you want more of these deep dive historical sleep stories, subscribe. I make these regularly, different topics, always with this same calm pacing. Comments also help me know what's working. Where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? I'm genuinely curious who's out there in the... All right, let's continue. There's a storm coming, a mechanism failing, and 6 months of isolation still ahead. Time to see how the lighthouse keepers really survived. You force yourself to eat breakfast, though your stomach doesn't want it. 2 pieces of hardtack soaked in coffee to soften them enough that you won't break a tooth. A small portion of dried cod that you've been rationing since the supply boat left. An apple from the barrel in the storage cellar, one of 37 remaining from the original 200. The apple is wrinkled and soft, its skin gone leathery with age, but it's still edible, and more importantly, it's still preventing scurvy. You've seen what scurvy does to men. Keeper Thomas Crawford at Point Bonita went 4 months without fresh food when his supply boat couldn't reach him during a particularly brutal winter. When they finally got to him, his teeth were falling out and his legs were so swollen he couldn't walk. He survived, but he never kept another light. Something in him broke during those months, something that fresh food and medical attention couldn't fix. You eat the apple slowly, chewing each bite thoroughly, making it last. Food is fuel, but it's also one of the few remaining pleasures in your life, and you've learned to extract every possible moment of satisfaction from it. The coffee is good, at least. You've managed your coffee supply carefully, rationing it to 1 pot per day, and you've still got enough to last until the supply boat returns. Coffee is more than just a stimulant here. It's a ritual, a connection to civilization, a reminder that somewhere out there people are sitting in cafes and restaurants, complaining about trivialities, living lives that don't depend on whether a brass bearing holds together for another night. After breakfast, you begin the storm preparation checklist. This is systematic work, the kind that keeps your mind occupied and your hands busy. The kind that prevents you from thinking too much about Eleanor or Catherine, or the grinding sound in the bearing, or the fact that you're 89 days into isolation with 91 days still to go, and sometimes you can't remember if you actually spoke your thoughts out loud or just thought them, and sometimes you catch yourself having entire conversations with people who aren't there, and then having to stop and reconstruct whether those conversations happened or whether you imagined them. The checklist is real. The checklist exists on paper. You can touch it and verify it, and that means it's not a product of your slowly deteriorating grip on consensus reality. First item, secure all exterior equipment. You pull on your heavy weather coat, a waxed canvas garment that reaches to your knees and has stood up to 3 months of salt spray and wind. The door from the keeper's quarters to the exterior gallery requires significant force to open against the wind that's already gusting to 30 knots. The morning is grey and getting darker, not lighter, as clouds pile up on the western horizon like mountains made of smoke. The gallery is a narrow walkway that circles the exterior of the tower, protected by an iron railing that's crusted with salt. You've walked this gallery hundreds of times, but you're always careful, which seems secure until you remember that a good wave hitting the tower can send spray 50 feet above the gallery level, and if that spray hits you at the wrong moment, if it unbalances you for just a second, You're going over that railing and falling 70 feet to the rocks below where the ocean will smash your body to pieces, and no one will ever know what happened to you. They'll just find the lighthouse abandoned and assume you went mad and jumped, which is what they assume about most lighthouse keepers who disappear. The exterior equipment consists of several items that need securing or removal before high winds arrive. There's a rain gauge that you're supposed to monitor and record daily, a completely pointless task when you're surrounded by ocean, but the lighthouse service wants data, and you provide data because that's your job. You empty the gauge, note the measurement in your pocket notebook, and bring the entire apparatus inside. In winds over 60 knots, it'll just become a projectile. There are 2 spare oil canisters chained to the gallery rail, backups in case the main storage becomes contaminated. You check the chains, make sure they're secure, add a 3rd chain for redundancy. There's a telescope mounted on a swivel, used for scanning the horizon for ships in distress. You cover it with a treated canvas bag and lash it down with cord. The fog bell, a massive bronze bell that you're supposed to ring manually during periods of low visibility, is already secured, but you check the mounting bolts anyway. Everything is about redundancy in a lighthouse. Every critical system has a backup, and every backup has a backup to the backup, because when you're alone and help is months away, a single point of failure is a death sentence. You complete the exterior check and return inside, your face stinging from the wind and salt. The next item on the checklist is inventory verification. You're supposed to do this weekly, but you've been doing it daily for the past week because the numbers aren't adding up the way they should, and that concerns you deeply. You descend to the storage cellar, a dank stone room at the base of the tower where the temperature stays constant year-round, cold enough to preserve food but not cold enough to freeze water. The cellar is organized with obsessive precision because disorganization in a lighthouse isn't just inefficient, it's dangerous. Every item has a designated location, every container is labeled, every quantity is recorded in the master inventory log. You start with the lamp oil. This is the most critical supply, the one thing you absolutely cannot run out of. The main storage consists of 12 large barrels, each containing 50 gallons of refined whale oil. When you arrived, all 12 barrels were full. You should have used approximately 1 barrel per month, which means you should have 3 empty barrels and 9 full ones. But you don't. You have 4 empty barrels and 8 full ones. You've gone through oil faster than you should have, and you can't figure out why. You've checked for leaks in the lamp reservoir, in the supply lines, in the storage barrels themselves. Nothing. The oil is just disappearing faster than the calculations say it should. You do the math again in your head, triple checking because maybe you're wrong. Maybe the isolation is affecting your ability to think clearly about numbers. 50 gallons per barrel. 12 barrels. 600 gallons total. The lamp consumes approximately 1 gallon per night. More in winter when the nights are longer. 89 nights means 89 gallons consumed, which should leave 511 gallons remaining. 8 full barrels is 400 gallons. You're missing over 100 gallons of oil, and you have no explanation for it. The implications of this are terrifying. If the consumption rate continues at this elevated level, you'll run out of oil before the supply boat arrives. And if you run out of oil, the light goes out. And if the light goes out, ships die. And if ships die because you mismanaged your supplies, because you failed in the most basic duty of a lighthouse keeper, you'll be finished. Not just dismissed from the service, but prosecuted, imprisoned, destroyed. You sit down on one of the barrels, your hands shaking slightly. This is the kind of problem that has no good solution. You can't reduce the lamp's consumption without reducing its brightness. And reducing brightness means reducing the effective range of the light. You can't call for emergency resupply because there's no way to communicate with shore. The lighthouse has no telegraph, no signal flags that could be seen from land, Nothing except the light itself. You're trapped in a situation where you have to continue operating normally while knowing that you might not have enough resources to complete your assignment. You continue the inventory check, moving through the food supplies with mechanical precision. Hardtack. 47 pounds remaining of the original 200. You should have at least 80 pounds left. Dried cod. 18 pounds of an original 100. Even more concerning. Dried beans. 62 pounds of an original 200. The pattern is consistent. Everything is being consumed faster than it should be. You're eating more than you think you are, or your initial consumption estimates were wrong, or something else is happening that you can't identify. The coffee situation is better. You've got 30 pounds remaining of an original 50, which is almost exactly on track. The sugar is fine too, but the staples, the foods that make up the bulk of your caloric intake, are running low. You do more mental calculations. If you reduce your daily food intake by 20%, if you accept being constantly hungry, you can probably stretch the supplies to last until the boat arrives. Probably. The uncertainty is like a physical weight in your chest. You've gone from being confident in your ability to endure 6 months of isolation to being unsure whether you'll survive the next 3 months, and this shift in perspective happened in the space of an hour, between breakfast and inventory check. You climb back up to the keeper's quarters, your legs heavy on the stairs. The wind outside has increased noticeably, and the tower is beginning to hum, a low-frequency vibration that you feel more than hear. This is how major storms announce themselves at Point Reyes. First, the wind increases gradually, then the tower starts to hum, then the waves start hitting hard enough that you can feel the impacts through 70 feet of stone and iron. You've got maybe 6 hours before this storm reaches its peak. You spend the afternoon on routine maintenance tasks. Anything to keep your hands busy and your mind away from the inventory problem. You polish the brass fittings in the lantern room until they gleam like gold. You clean the windows that face seaward, removing salt deposits that accumulated overnight. You oil the hinges on every door in the tower. You sharpen the knives in the kitchen. You reorganize the bookshelf in the keeper's office, arranging the 23 books you have access to by height, then by author, then by subject, then back to height, because you can't decide which system is best, and it doesn't matter anyway because you've read all of them at least twice. At 3 in the afternoon, you prepare an early dinner. The sun will set around 5:30, and you need to have the lamp lit and rotating before darkness falls. You eat a sparse meal, consciously implementing the 20% reduction you calculated earlier. It's not enough food. Your body knows it's not enough food. But it's what you have, and you've endured worse. During the war, there were weeks when you ate less than this, when half rations felt like a feast. You survived that. You'll survive this. The war comes back to you sometimes, not in dramatic flashbacks like you've heard other veterans describe, but in quiet moments when your mind has nothing else to occupy it. You were at Shiloh, the first day, when everything went wrong and Johnston's rebels came screaming out of the woods, and your regiment broke and you ran with them because staying meant dying, and you weren't ready to die. You were 19 years old, and you'd imagined war as something glorious, something with flags and drums and clear lines between heroism and cowardice. But there were no clear lines at Shiloh. Just smoke and screaming and the wet sounds that bodies make when metal tears through them. You spent 2 years after that trying to prove you weren't a coward, volunteering for dangerous details, taking risks that should have killed you, and somehow you survived when better men died. And then the war ended, and you came home and discovered that Eleanor didn't want to hear about any of it, didn't want to know what you'd done or why you'd done it, just wanted you to be the person you were before you left, and you couldn't explain that person was dead and someone else was wearing his body. You shake your head, physically trying to dislodge the memories. This is what isolation does. It removes the distractions that normally keep your mind in the present, and suddenly you're spending hours reliving things that happened 20 years ago, Conversations you can't change, decisions you can't unmake, moments when you chose wrong and the consequences rippled forward through time until they became your entire life. The war led to the drinking, which led to the arguments, which led to the instability, which led to taking the lighthouse job because it was the only work that would have you, which led to missing Catherine's last days because you were on duty at Point Montara, which led to Eleanor leaving, which led to volunteering for Point Reyes because 6 months of isolation seemed preferable to living in a San Francisco boarding house, surrounded by people who reminded you of everything you'd lost. You climbed to the lantern room at 4:30, giving yourself a full hour before sunset to prepare the lamp. This is your favorite time of day, when the afternoon light is golden and the lens catches it and throws patterns around the room like a kaleidoscope. The lamp preparation is a ritual you've perfected over 89 days. First, you check the oil level in the reservoir and top it off from a 5-gallon can that you refilled from the main storage this morning. The reservoir holds exactly 3 gallons, enough for 12 hours of burning with a small safety margin. You check the wick, making sure it's properly trimmed and positioned. A wick that's too long produces excess smoke. A wick that's too short produces insufficient light. The correct wick height is measured with a small brass gauge, another precision instrument that the lighthouse service provides. Another example of how this entire operation depends on measurements and standards and exact specifications. Next, you clean the lamp chimney, a glass cylinder that surrounds the flame and protects it from drafts while allowing oxygen to feed the combustion. The chimney must be spotless because any soot or residue reduces light transmission. You use a special cleaning solution, a mixture of alcohol and ammonia that cuts through carbon deposits without leaving streaks. The fumes make your eyes water, but you've learned to breathe through your mouth while cleaning. Finally, you inspect the Fresnel lens itself one more time, making sure your morning cleaning is still perfect, checking for any spots you might have missed. The lens is hypnotic in the afternoon light, each prism catching the sun and refracting it into component colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. The same spectrum that makes rainbows, captured here in carefully engineered glass and made to serve the purpose of guiding ships through darkness. At 5:15, with the sun touching the western horizon, you light. This is done with a long match, a specialized design that burns slowly and can't be extinguished by drafts. You touch the flame to the wick, and it catches immediately, spreading across the surface until the entire wick is burning evenly. You adjust the flame height to exactly 2 inches using the brass gauge, then lower the chimney over it, converting whale oil into light at a rate of 1 gallon per night, 8 gallons per week, 400 gallons per year, a steady consumption of stored sunlight that once grew as phytoplankton in the ocean, was consumed by krill, was consumed by whales, was harvested by whales, was rendered and refined and shipped here to Point Reyes, where you burn it to keep sailors alive. Everything is connected in chains of cause and effect that stretch across the world and back through time. You engage the rotation mechanism, lowering the 300-pound weight that will power the lens movement for the next 4 hours. The gears engage with a solid click, and the lens begins its slow rotation, 1 revolution per 60 seconds. The characteristic sweep that every sailor on this coast knows means Point Reyes. 5 seconds of light, 55 seconds of darkness, then light again. The bearing grinds. You hear it clearly now, a metallic protest that happens once per rotation. The additional grease you added this morning has helped, but the problem is getting worse, not better. You kneel beside the mechanism, listening intently, trying to diagnose the exact nature of the failure. It's definitely the main bearing. The sound comes from the exact point where the vertical shaft meets the rotation assembly. What you're hearing is probably a scored bearing surface, a place where the brass is worn away, and now steel is grinding against steel. This will accelerate the wear, creating more damage, creating more friction, eventually creating enough resistance that the weight can't power the rotation anymore. When that happens, You'll have maybe an hour to fix it before the light goes out. And you can't fix it during darkness, which means if it fails at night, you're looking at potential disaster. The storm is here now, not at full strength yet, but building. The wind is a constant roar outside the lantern room, and the first serious waves are hitting the tower, sending vibrations up through the stone that you can feel in your feet. You've checked the weather records. The worst storm to hit Point Reyes in the past 50 years was in November 1854, when hurricane-force winds were sustained for 18 hours and waves reached over 100 feet high. The keeper at that time, a man named Peterson, maintained the light through the entire storm despite the tower flexing so much that cracks appeared in the masonry and he could see daylight through the walls. Peterson received a commendation for his dedication. He also went completely mad afterward and had to be removed from the service. They found him in the lantern room singing hymns to the lens and refusing to leave even when the relief keeper arrived. He died in an asylum 6 months later. You've read his logbook entries from that November, and they start normal enough, professional observations about weather and lamp performance, but by the third day of the storm they deteriorate into rambling discussions with God about the nature of light and darkness and whether maintaining a lighthouse is a form of prayer. By the fifth day, he's not making sense at all, just writing fragments of scripture and mathematical equations that don't calculate anything. You've wondered sometimes if you're following the same trajectory, if your own grip on reality is slowly eroding in ways you can't perceive yourself, if your logbook entries are making sense to you but would seem insane to anyone else who read them. You've sealed them with putty, checked the frames for weakness, done everything the manual says to do, but you still worry. A broken window up here would extinguish the lamp instantly, and replacing glass during a storm is impossible. You'd have to cover the opening with canvas or wood and hope that the reduced light output is sufficient, knowing that it probably isn't, knowing that somewhere out there a ship is depending on seeing your full-strength beam, and anything less might mean they miscalculate their position by half a mile, and half a mile is the difference between sailing past the rocks and sailing into them. You settle into the watch routine. During storms, you don't leave the lantern room. You stay here, monitoring the lamp, the rotation, the bearing, the oil consumption, watching for any sign of failure or weakness. You have a chair, a hard wooden chair that's uncomfortable enough that you won't fall asleep accidentally. You have a blanket because the lantern room is cold despite the lamp heat. You have water and some hardtack in case you need food during the night. You have the logbook where you'll record conditions every hour. And you have time. Endless time. Hours and hours of time with nothing to do except watch a light rotate and listen to a bearing grind and wonder if this is the night everything falls apart. The storm intensifies through the evening. By 8 o'clock, the waves are hitting the tower hard enough that you can see the lamp flame flicker with each impact. The vibration traveling up through 70 feet of stone and reaching the delicate flame that must not go out. By 9 o'clock, the barometer had dropped to 29.2 inches, the lowest you've seen since you arrived. By 10 o'clock, you can hear things breaking outside. Pieces of equipment you thought were secured tearing loose and clattering against the tower. The fog bell rings occasionally when the wind hits it just right. A mournful sound that makes you think of funerals. You wind the rotation mechanism at 10:30, cranking the 300-pound weight back to the top of the shaft. 20 minutes of steady work, your right shoulder burning with effort. The bearing grinds throughout the entire process, a sound that's getting louder with each passing hour. You add more grease, pumping it into the housing while the mechanism rotates, but it's not helping anymore. The damage has progressed past the point where lubrication can compensate. You're looking at a catastrophic bearing failure, and it's going to happen soon, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but soon. And when it happens, you'll have to make a decision that no training manual covers. Do you stop the light to make repairs, breaking the fundamental rule of lighthouse keeping? Or do you let the bearing destroy itself completely? resulting in the same outcome but with the technical cover that you followed regulations. At midnight, you make your hourly log entry. Storm conditions are severe. Barometer 29.1 and still falling. Winds estimated 70 knots with gusts higher. Seas running 60 to 80 feet. Lamp burning normally but rotation mechanism deteriorating. Estimate critical failure within 24 hours. Maintaining a watch. You sit back in your chair, the blanket wrapped around your shoulders, and watch the light sweep through the storm. Each rotation takes 60 seconds. Each hour contains 60 rotations. Each night contains approximately 12 hours. That's 720 rotations per night. 89 nights so far means 64,000 rotations. And each rotation includes one moment where the bearing grinds and you wonder if this is the one where it seizes completely. You're not sure what's worse, the anticipation of failure or the fate. At least when things break, you know what you're dealing with. This waiting, this knowledge that disaster is approaching but not knowing exactly when, is its own form of torture. The isolation doesn't help. If there were another keeper here, you could share the watch, get some sleep, and have someone to discuss problems with. But Point Reyes is a single keeper station, which means everything depends on you. Your skill, your judgment, your ability to keep functioning when you're exhausted and underfed and starting to question whether the conversations you're having are with real people or with products of your deteriorating mental state. You stand up and walk around the lantern room, forcing circulation back into your legs. The lens rotates past you, a massive presence that dominates the space. 4,000 pounds of glass and brass, the most sophisticated optical instrument most people will ever see, and it's yours to maintain. The responsibility should feel noble, should feel important, should feel like you're serving something larger than yourself. But right now it just feels heavy, like a weight pressing down on your chest. Like your atlas holding up a sky made of glass that's about to shatter. The storm rages outside, the tower hums with vibration, the bearing grinds, and somewhere out there in the darkness, ships are trusting that your light will guide them safely through this chaos. You can't see them. You'll never meet their crews. You'll never know if your work tonight saves anyone's life, or if you're just standing here watching a light rotate for an audience of waves and wind. But you keep watching anyway, because that's what lighthouse keepers do. They keep the light burning. They maintain the rotation. They stay at their post through the long night, through the isolation and the doubt and the grinding sound of machinery slowly destroying itself. They survive. And tomorrow when the dawn comes, if the tower is still standing and the light is still burning, they'll climb down the 73 stairs and eat their rationed breakfast and begin the whole process again, knowing that 90 days is a very long time when you're alone and the supplies are running out and the machinery is failing and there's no one coming to help. The morning of the third day after the storm breaks clear and cold, the kind of crystalline November morning that makes you understand why people think California is paradise. The sky is impossibly blue, the ocean has flattened to gentle swells, and the air is so transparent you can see individual trees on the coastal hills 20 miles away. It's the kind of morning that makes storms seem like fever dreams, like maybe none of it happened and you imagined the whole thing. But the wreckage on the rocks is real. You can see it clearly in the morning light, twisted metal and splintered wood spread across the granite like a child's toys scattered after a tantrum. And that means the rest of it was real too. The decision you made, the men who died, the 2 hours of darkness while you made repairs, all of it happened. All of it will stay with you for however many years you have remaining. A permanent weight that you'll carry alongside all the other weights you've accumulated during your 43 years of life. You eat breakfast in silence, the same sparse rations, and afterward you climb to the lantern room and perform the morning maintenance. The lens is spotless because you cleaned it last night, but you clean it again anyway because the routine matters more than the result. The bearing is still grinding, but still functional. Your field repair has lasted 3 days now, which is 3 days more than you expected. Maybe it'll last the full 91 days until the supply boat arrives. Maybe it'll fail tomorrow. The uncertainty used to bother you, but you've learned that certainty is a luxury that lighthouse keepers can't afford. You do your best with what you have, and then you live with the consequences, whatever they are. At 10 in the morning, you see the Coast Guard cutter. It's a small steam-powered vessel, maybe 80 feet long, approaching from the south and heading directly for the wreck site. They must have received word from passing ships that saw the debris, or perhaps someone on shore spotted the wreckage and reported it. The cutter anchors about 100 yards off the rocks, and you watch through the telescope as they launch a small boat with 4 men who row to the wreck site and begin their investigation. This is standard procedure. The Coast Guard will recover any bodies, document the wreck, try to determine the vessel's identity so they can notify the owners and any families. They'll probably collect valuable cargo if there's any salvageable, and they'll file a report that includes the circumstances of the wreck, the weather conditions, and whether the lighthouse was operating properly. That last part tightens your stomach. The Coast Guard will want to know if Point Reyes light was burning when the ship approached. They'll want to verify that you maintained the watch, that you followed protocols, that you did everything correctly, and you'll have to tell them that the light was dark for 2 hours while you made an emergency repair. You'll have to explain your decision, justify your actions, accept whatever judgment they render. The thought of that conversation makes you want to hide in the tower and pretend you didn't see them, but you can't. You're the keeper. They'll want your statement. They'll want your logbook. They'll want to understand what happened from your perspective. You watch the Coast Guard crew work the wreck site for about an hour. They recover 3 bodies that you can see, placing them carefully in the small boat. There might be more in the water or wedged in rocks where you can't see from the lighthouse. When they finish, they row back to the cutter, and you think they're going to leave, but instead they turn toward the lighthouse. They're coming here. Your heart rate increases, your palms start sweating, and you recognize these as fear responses, which is absurd because the Coast Guard aren't going to harm you. They're just going to ask questions. But your body doesn't distinguish between different types of threat. Danger is danger, whether it's a storm or an official inquiry, and right now your nervous system is telling you to run, even though there's nowhere to run to. You climb down from the lantern room and wait at the base of the tower, watching through a window as the Coast Guard boat approaches the small landing area below the lighthouse. 4 men disembark, all wearing the distinctive Coast Guard uniform, and they begin climbing the steep path that leads from the water to the lighthouse complex. You open the door before they knock, which surprises them slightly. The man in front, an older officer with grey hair and lieutenant's bars, recovers quickly and extends his hand. "Lieutenant Morrison, United States Coast Guard," he says. "You're the keeper here?" You shake his hand and confirm that yes, you're the keeper, and you've been stationed at Point Reyes for $90 a 1 days. And yes, you saw the wreck, and you've documented everything in your logbook. Lieutenant Morrison nods, his expression neutral, giving nothing away. "We'll need to see that logbook," he says. "And I'd like to hear your account of the storm and the wreck." You lead them inside to the keeper's office, feeling like a criminal, even though you haven't technically violated any laws. Just protocols, just the unwritten rules that every keeper learns and every keeper is supposed to follow absolutely. You retrieve the logbook from its shelf and hand it to Morrison, who opens it and begins reading. His 3 men stand quietly, waiting, and you stand there too. Your hands clasped behind your back like a soldier at attention, waiting for judgment. Morrison reads for several minutes, his face expressionless. He pauses at your entry about the emergency repair, reads it twice, then looks up at you. "You extinguished the lamp for 2 hours during the height of the storm," he says. It's not a question, just a statement of fact, but it hangs in the air like an accusation. You nod. "The bearing was failing catastrophically," you explain. Your voice steady even though you don't feel steady at all. "If I'd let it run, the rotation would have stopped anyway. probably with damage to the entire lens assembly. I made the judgment that a temporary darkness was preferable to a permanent failure. Morrison considers this, then asks, "When did you relight the lamp?" You tell him 0305 hours. He flips through the logbook to verify, then asks, "When did the ship wreck?" You tell him 0429 hours. He closes the logbook and looks at you directly, and you can't read his expression at all. "So the light was burning when the vessel approached the rocks," he says. The relief that floods through you is so intense it's almost painful. He's right. The light was burning. You'd become so focused on the 2 hours of darkness, so convinced that those 2 hours caused the wreck, that you'd lost track of the basic timeline. The ship hit at 4:29. The light was restored at 3:05. That's over an hour of warning. If the ship's crew had seen your light, if they'd been able to respond to it, they would have had time to change course. The wreck wasn't caused by the light being dark. It was caused by the storm being too powerful, the ship being too damaged, the crew being unable to save themselves despite having all the warning that Point Reyes Light could provide. "Yes, sir," you say, and your voice cracks slightly on the second word because you're trying not to cry and not entirely succeeding. The light was burning. Morrison nods, makes a note in a small book he's carrying, then asks about the bearing repair. You explain the procedure in technical detail, describing the damage, the improvised shimming solution, the grease application, the test procedures. Morrison listens carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrate he understands rotation mechanisms and bearing assemblies better than most officers would. When you finish, he's quiet for a moment, then says, "That was good work. Unorthodox, but good work. You probably saved the lens from catastrophic damage." He pauses, then adds, "The temporary extinguishing was justified under the emergency provisions of the regulations. I'll note that in my report." You're not sure what to say. You've been preparing for condemnation, for dismissal, for some kind of punishment, and instead you're receiving commendation. Morrison seems to understand your confusion because he continues. Lighthouse keeping isn't about blindly following rules. It's about maintaining the light, using whatever means necessary. You assessed the situation, made a difficult decision, executed a complex repair under terrible conditions, and restored the light with minimum downtime. That's exactly what a keeper is supposed to do. He hands the logbook back to you, then extends his hand again. "I'll include your actions in my report as an example of proper emergency response." They leave shortly after, rowing back to their cutter, and you stand at the window watching them go, trying to process what just happened. You've been carrying the weight of 4 deaths for 3 days, convinced that you killed those men through your decision to stop the light, and now you're being told that your decision was correct, that you did everything right, that the wreck would have happened regardless because the light was burning when it mattered. The logical part of your brain accepts this. The timeline is clear, the evidence is unambiguous. But the emotional part, the part that watched men die and couldn't help them, that part doesn't care about timelines or evidence. That part knows that somewhere women are widows and children are fatherless because a ship hit the rocks near Point Reyes Light. And it doesn't matter whether the light was burning or not. It doesn't matter whether you followed protocols or broke them. What matters is that you're alive and they're not. And there's no logic that makes that feel fair. You spend the afternoon in the keeper's quarters, sitting at the small table, drinking coffee that's grown cold, thinking about what lighthouse keeping actually means. It's not about perfection. It's not about never making mistakes or never facing impossible choices. It's about doing your best with incomplete information and limited resources, and accepting that sometimes your best isn't enough to prevent tragedy. It's about understanding that you can't save everyone, that your job is to provide warning and guidance, but ultimately ships make their own decisions and live with their own consequences. It's about surviving the isolation and the doubt and the slow erosion of certainty that comes from being alone with your thoughts for months at a time. It's about keeping the light burning not because you believe it will prevent all disasters, but because it might prevent some, and some is better than none. And one ship saved justifies all the nights of watching and waiting and wondering if any of it matters. The Coast Guard cutter is long gone, disappeared over the southern horizon, and the wreck site is empty again except for the debris and the gulls. Tomorrow or the next day, another storm will come and scatter the wreckage further, breaking it into smaller pieces, eventually grinding it down until there's nothing left except maybe some brass fittings that'll wash up on beaches years from now, found by children who'll never know they came from a ship that died on a November night in 1883. And Point Reyes light will keep burning through all of it, through storms and calms and decades of nights, long after you're gone, long after everyone who remembers this particular wreck is gone. The light will keep sweeping its 5-second pattern across the darkness because that's what lighthouses do. They outlast the keepers who tend them. They outlast the ships they save and the ships they fail to save. They outlast everything except the rocks they're built on. Evening approaches, and you prepare the lamp for another night. The routine is comfortable now, familiar, each step following naturally from the one before. You've cleaned this lens hundreds of times. You've trimmed this wick hundreds of times. You've lit this flame hundreds of times, and you'll do it hundreds more before your assignment ends, before the supply boat arrives and you step aboard and sail away from Point Reyes and never come back. You wonder sometimes what happens to lighthouse keepers after they leave their posts. Do they readjust to civilization? Do they find the noise and crowds and constant human interaction overwhelming after months of silence? Do they ever stop listening for the grinding of bearings that aren't there, or waking every 4 hours to wind mechanisms that don't exist? Or do they carry their lighthouses with them forever? Internal structures built in the image of external ones, places they can retreat to when the world becomes too much. You suspect you'll be the latter type. This tower, this lens, this endless routine of watching and maintaining, it's changed something fundamental in how you think about yourself and your place in the world. You're not the same person who arrived here 90 months ago. You're not even the same person who made the emergency bearing repair 3 days ago. You're someone different now. Someone who's learned that surviving isn't the same as winning. That doing your duty isn't the same as being a hero. That sometimes the best you can offer is a light in the darkness and the hope that it's enough. You make your midnight log entry, lamp burning normally. Rotation satisfactory, the sea is calm. Clear skies, no vessels observed. Simple facts, no emotion, just the information that the district inspector will review when he reads through your logbook and determines whether you're competent to continue as a keeper. You've learned that's all anyone wants from you, really. Not your feelings or your fears or your philosophical ruminations on isolation and duty. Just the facts. Did the light burn? Did the lens rotate? Did you maintain your watch? Yes, and everything else is irrelevant to everyone except you, and you've learned to keep it to yourself, to write it in invisible ink in the margins of your thoughts, where no one will ever read it. The night passes slowly, measured out in 4-hour increments marked by the winding of the mechanism. 2 a.m., 6 a.m. Dawn is approaching. The sky is lightening in the east. The stars are fading. The ocean transforms from black to gray. Another night successfully maintained. Another morning arrived. Another day beginning in the endless succession of days that make up a lighthouse keeper's life. You extinguish the lamp as the sun breaks over the hills, perform your morning cleaning routine, make your dawn log entry, and climb down the 73 stairs to begin another day of survival. The photograph of Eleanor and Catherine is still on its shelf. You look at it for a moment, and for the first time in weeks, you don't feel the crushing weight of failure when you see their faces. You just feel a quiet sadness, an acceptance that some things end and don't come back. that some mistakes can't be fixed, that sometimes the best you can do is learn to live with what you've lost and keep moving forward because stopping isn't an option. You make breakfast, the same sparse rations, and while you eat you think about what you'll do when your assignment ends. You can't stay with the lighthouse service forever. The isolation is corrosive. You can feel it working on you, slowly dissolving the parts of yourself that connect to other humans. Another year of this and you might become Peterson, another cautionary tale that new keepers hear during their training. But maybe one more assignment after this. Maybe a 2-keeper station where you'd have someone to share the watch, someone to talk to occasionally, someone to confirm that your perceptions of reality are more or less aligned with theirs. That might be manageable. That might be a way to keep doing the work without losing yourself completely. Or maybe not. Maybe this is your last lighthouse, and after Point Reyes you'll find some other kind of work, something that involves people and daylight and regular schedules, something normal, though you're not sure you remember what normal feels like anymore, or whether you'd even recognize it if you found it. After breakfast you perform the daily maintenance tasks that fill your time. Check the tower for damage. Inspect the rotation mechanism. Monitor the bearing that keeps grinding but keeps working. Clean the windows. Organize the supplies. Update the inventory records, noting that your consumption rates remain mysteriously high and your stores continue to dwindle faster than they should. You've accepted that you're probably going to run out of food before the supply boat arrives, that the last few weeks of your assignment will involve hunger that goes beyond mere discomfort into actual deprivation. But you'll survive it. People can survive surprising amounts of hunger if they have to, and you have to. So you will. The afternoon is warm and clear, and you risk going outside to the gallery, standing at the railing and looking out at the ocean that's tried so hard to kill you and failed. The wreckage on the rocks is still visible, a reminder of mortality and the limits of human control. But it doesn't dominate your attention the way it did yesterday. It's just wreckage now. Sad but not devastating, tragic but not personal. You've made your peace with what happened, or at least you've achieved a truce with the guilt that will probably last until some random moment months from now when it ambushes you again and you have to fight the whole battle over. That's how trauma works, you've learned. It doesn't resolve cleanly. It just becomes something you carry, something you've learned to accommodate. Like an old injury that aches when the weather changes. As the sun begins to set, painting the ocean in shades of orange and gold that make it look almost welcoming, you climb back to the lantern room for the evening lamp lighting. This is your favorite moment of every day, when the afternoon light is perfect and the lens catches it and creates beauty from precision engineering. You light the lamp, engage the rotation, and watch the first sweep of the evening arc across the sky. The bearing grinds, the lens rotates, the light reaches out into the gathering darkness, and somewhere out there, maybe, a ship sees your light and knows where it is, and adjusts its course accordingly, and sails safely through the night because you were here, because you kept the watch, because you maintained the light despite everything. That's what lighthouse keeping is, you think as you settle into the watch chair for another night. It's not about glory or recognition or even certainty that your work. It's about showing up every day and doing the job that needs doing. Maintaining systems that keep other people safe. Accepting that you'll never know most of the lives you've saved because ships that don't wreck don't make the news, don't generate reports, don't leave evidence of their safe passage. It's about understanding that your contribution to the world is measured in disasters that don't happen, in tragedies that are prevented, in futures that are allowed to continue because you were competent and diligent and refused to give up even when everything was falling apart around you. It's not romantic. It's not particularly heroic. It's just work. Important work. Work that someone has to do. And tonight that someone is you. So you sit in your chair, wrapped in your blanket, watching the light sweep across the Pacific, counting down the days until the supply boat arrives, surviving, just surviving, which is enough. which has to be enough, which is all that anyone can really do when they're alone in the darkness with a light that must not go out. 91 days remaining, 90 after tonight, 80 time the day after that, the numbers decreasing, the time passing, the isolation continuing its slow work, but you'll make it. You've survived the worst storm of the season, survived a catastrophic bearing failure, survived watching a ship die, survived the guilt and the doubt and the slow erosion of your certainty about everything. You can survive 91 more days. And when the supply boat finally arrives, when you step aboard and sail away from Point Reyes, you'll carry this experience with you forever. Not as a wound exactly, but as a mark, a permanent change in your understanding of what you're capable of enduring and what endurance actually costs. The lighthouse keepers of the 1880s, all of them. Every single one who stood watch in isolation and maintained lights that saved lives they never knew about. They understood something that we've forgotten in our modern world of automation and redundancy and systems that don't depend on individual human competence. They understood that sometimes survival is the victory, that sometimes doing your job adequately is a heroic achievement, that sometimes the best you can offer the world is a light in the darkness and the promise that as long as you're breathing, that light will burn. And now, from your comfortable bed, with your controlled temperature and your certain safety, you can appreciate what they endured without having to endure it yourself. You can understand that the warmth you're feeling right now, the security of your blankets and your walls and your distance from danger is a luxury that lighthouse keepers earned for all of us by standing watch through nights that should have broken them but didn't. So rest easy, sleep well, and remember that somewhere, always, someone is keeping a light burning, someone is standing watch, someone is surviving so that others can thrive. The keepers are still there in different forms, doing different work, but the principle remains the same. Someone maintains the systems that keep us safe. Someone shows up every day and does the job that needs doing. Someone keeps, and that's enough. That's always been enough. Sleep now, the watch is covered, the light is burning, and you're safe.